Hello, my name is Maia Buschman. I am a conservation psychology major, class of 2020. And for my thesis, I wrote on the applications of social and environmental sustainability in affordable housing, looking at how affordable housing can be better both for people and the planet. So to start, why are we here? How does affordable housing relate to sustainability? And how is an environmental studies major writing on this topic? Well, affordable housing is actually a great nexus of opportunity to engage all three pillars of sustainability, that is, economics, equity, and environment. In terms of economics, affordable housing deals with financial accessibility as well as broader economic systems. In terms of equity, housing is a right that all people should have access to regardless of their circumstances. And in terms of environment, housing is a great land use issue and also impacts both the broader natural landscape as well as human health. So just to give an outline of my presentation, I will start with the economics and defining affordability. Then I will move to community opposition or NIMBYism and looking at the social components of that. I will then look at environmental considerations and tie this all together using Vermont as a case study. So to start with economics, the standard definition of affordability in housing is that housing costs are at maximum 30% of a household's income. And this is the standard measure used by most organizations and entities, but there are some flaws to this measurement. That is, it generalizes across various housing types and compositions. It doesn't include transportation costs, and housing is intimately linked to its environment and relative location in terms of amenities and services. And it doesn't account for variation in household financial circumstances over time. And just to give an example here, looking at in Vermont, the Addison County Community Trust is an organization based in Virgins that develops, owns, and manages over 600 units of affordable housing in the county. And so they're a great example to look at when it comes to defining affordability. And they say, this is a snippet from their brochure, and they state that their apartments are typically designed to be affordable to families earning less than area median income. And we can see on the top a chart from the Department of Housing and Urban Development that shows the fiscal year 2020 area median income for Addison County. We can see that it is about $80,000 a year. And so anything under this is the target demographic for the Addison County Community Trust. We can see that that's a broad range of eligibility. And in the red square in the middle, we see the different margins for low, very low, and extremely low income brackets. And so that 30% standard is going to mean different things when someone is in a different income bracket below the area median. And additionally, in their brochure, they state that some units carry additional subsidies guaranteeing that qualifying residents will not pay more than 30% of their gross income in rent. And so this suggests that that 30% standard is not met even all of the time. And so that poses even greater challenges for certain families and households that are struggling to pay for their housing. And additionally, transportation is a huge cost that should be factored in given the rural context. So now to pivot to social sustainability, looking particularly at community opposition to affordable housing developments. NIMBYism is a term, an acronym that stands for Not in My Backyard. It refers to this local opposition to unwanted developments that tends to focus on the negative impacts of projects. And in my research, I looked both at the psychological underpinnings and foundations of this mindset and this opposition, as well as the social equity outcomes that result from these protests. All right, so now to look at the psychology of NIMBYism and the psychology behind opposition. Framing is an important tool that is used both by the protesters as well as by people aiming to promote development. And framing is the use of language with a particular aim to promote certain perceptions or attitudes towards something. And on the side of protesters, the idea is to use more socially acceptable arguments to help gain community acceptance for the protests as well as political leverage. And this can mean focusing on things such as property value increases, property value decreases, increased density of traffic, etc. However, sometimes these may be masking different issues that are really at play. One study I looked at found a positive correlation between NIMBYist protests and opposition, as a positive correlation between this and stereotypical beliefs about race, class, and immigrant status. And so the framing might be used to mask these concerns and instead make them seem more socially acceptable. On the other hand, the people trying to promote the inclusion and acceptance of affordable housing developments might need to alter the way they talk about these developments and the particular language they use. Low income and affordable housing as terms tend to carry with them certain connotations and associations. As mentioned, those stereotypical beliefs might be brought to the fore just by using those terms. And so it could be prudent in some cases to use different terminology. For example, life cycle housing looks at how people are in different transitional stages of their life and might need greater assistance at some points, whereas workforce housing identifies and emphasizes how people, the future residents, will be a positive benefit to their community and how they'll contribute to the local economy. Another thing to look at aside from framing is the value frameworks behind certain political ideologies which may be at play. And freedom and equality are two different things that tend to come up in this idea of housing developments. Freedom, which is more of a conservative value, looks at self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and essentially suggests that people are responsible for acquiring their own housing, whereas equality suggests that everyone has a right to housing, and certain people who may not be able to attain that themselves should be able to get assistance from the government in attaining that. And now just to look at the social equity piece, or the outcomes, it's important here to note that local political participation in these decisions is not inherently negative, and in fact reflects principles of sustainable communities. That is, participating in these democratic processes and really having one's voice heard. But there are some flaws to the process as it is now, and as it sometimes manifests with these protests, namely that it is spurred by a sense of distrust or reactionary opposition. And it might end up being that there are imbalances in political capital, and some people are speaking out, but they are not fully representative of the community that they're a part of. And this can lead to unjust outcomes, where, for instance, affordable housing is cited in areas that are already oversaturated, and this can further exacerbate the cycle of poverty and make it more difficult for people, low-income people, to advance. And to give a local example, here we have the Safford Commons development in Woodstock, Vermont, and this project faced 10 years of opposition. It was an 8-acre development with 24 multifamily housing units. And the framing of the people who opposed the project was that they would lose natural viewscape. By presence of houses, they would no longer be able to see the forest. And also, they were concerned about increased density and how that would impact the character of the town. And some of the values that we can see underlying these arguments are liberty, in that they were worried that their property rights were being infringed. Ultimately, the Vermont Supreme Court ruled that this was not the case. Purity is also seen here in terms of preserving the natural landscape as it is, and harm in that they are attuned to the loss of this natural landscape. And liberty and purity are more conservative values, while harm is a more liberal value. And so here we can see that there's a representation pretty much across the political spectrum in this protest in particular. And now to turn to the third pillar of sustainability, or environment. In terms of housing, there are two different scales that we can look at. We can look at the micro scale, at the individual housing units themselves. And greening is a way to help promote eco-efficiency, minimizing resource use, and also maximizing safety and health through the use of eco-friendly, sustainable, non-toxic materials. At the macro scale, we can look at land use and development patterns. Building with the local landscape is important, both in terms of the natural elements as well as the cultural elements. And also, compact mixed-use development patterns are important to help minimize sprawl and destruction of natural landscapes, and they also help promote accessibility to different amenities. And environmental justice is a good topic to bring on the table when talking about environment and also social concerns. Environmental justice aims to address disproportionate environmental burdens, and in the realm of affordable housing, indoor air quality tends to be a high concern. That is, low-income households tend to be more exposed to indoor pollutants than non-low-income households, and this leads to differential health outcomes. However, on the other hand, environmental justice also aims to promote equal distribution of environmental benefits, and this, of course, includes affordability and accessibility of housing, and access to good quality housing, and also energy efficiency helps reduce costs for residents and help decrease that cost burden. And mobile homes are an interesting example for the Vermont context in particular because they are actually quite an important source of rural affordable housing, namely because the development patterns are such that there's not often a lot of rental housing or apartments available. These serve to fill that niche, and they have a low entry cost, which makes them appealing for low income families and households. However, there are some issues in terms of variability of construction quality standards throughout the history of manufactured housing. There has been somewhat of a lack of emphasis on promoting good quality standards, and so this exposes people living in these conditions to different health risks, perhaps by using toxic materials. And then also there might be concerns about the safety of the infrastructure. For example, how susceptible they are to natural disasters. Tropical Storm Irene is a unfortunate example where this storm really had a heavy negative impact on mobile home parks. And Vermont Homes is a company that has done some revitalization of some mobile home parks in the state, replacing the dilapidated homes with newer, improved buildings and structures that have better build quality, durability, use healthier, non-toxic materials. And additionally, they are zero energy, and through the use of renewables, produce as much energy as they consume. And so environmentally, all around, they're pretty much getting an A+ for that. But there are some limitations, and this comes from the economic side, in that they are far more expensive upfront than traditional manufactured housing. And so this makes them perhaps inaccessible to the same people that would benefit from this improved quality home. And so that is a big consideration. And certain financial assistance might help with that, but that's just something to keep in mind, that it's not as economically competitive as the thing it's trying to replace. And just to touch here a little bit on some other solutions to addressing the environment component of sustainability with housing, smart growth or infill in downtown areas is a way to help promote compact mixed-use development and not continue sprawling into natural landscapes. And additionally, there are some zoning variances that might allow for greater density on particular plots of land, but this seems more of a small-scale solution and does not quite address the issue that there is overall with restrictive zoning in the state and the social and community pushback that there is, as seen, for example, in the Safford Commons case, against increased density. So just to sum it up and conclude, how sustainable is affordable housing in Vermont? Well, generally, residents seem to be fairly socially conscious. There's a high importance placed on local political participation in the state, so that is great. And there's quite a broad representation of political ideologies in protests, as we saw in the Safford Commons case. Additionally, there also seems to be a fairly broad awareness and acceptance of the importance of environmental considerations, for example, disaster readiness and health outcomes in mobile homes. Zoning does tend to favor land conservation over development, but this is not necessarily a bad thing and might in fact lead to positive outcomes such as smart growth. As mentioned before, this helps promote accessibility to amenities and services while also decreasing sprawl and land use conversion. And just to touch on it briefly, there are no new or novel approaches to the economic question, but there are some things that should be more greatly considered, such as the transportation costs, for example. I just want to thank my advisors, Michelle McCauley in the psychology department and Erin Sassin in the history of art and architecture department for all their help on my project, and also acknowledging some people and groups that I interviewed along the way. Thank you.